Okay, welcome to the 34th meeting of the Hawaii iOS Developer Meetup. Today's quote of the week, or the quote of the week, is Steve Jobs' quote. If you want to live your life in a creative way as an artist, you have to not look back too much. You have to be willing to take whatever you've done and whoever you were and throw them away. Kind of a thought-provoking quote. I don't know if I completely agree with it, but I thought it was a new quote that I haven't shared before. And does anyone want to talk about that for a bit? If not, we'll continue going on. So we've got upcoming meetups. We're going to be doing ARKit Part 2 on August 17th. And then O'Neill is going to be doing a talk on instruments. So I think he's feverishly looking into instruments, and that's kind of profiling in terms of Xcode in your app. And he'll be presenting on the 24th. And then on August 31st, I'm going to be preparing for that, just kind of researching online, excuse me, to find best image caching best practices, because you know, if you have like 7 images for a location or something, you don't want to every time you go to a location have to download them all again. So I'm going to be doing some research on that, so that should be fun. Pro tip for this week is I'm using Xcode 9 exclusively now, not Xcode 8. So some change up when I find errors. I always do Command 4, but it's changed to Command 5 in Xcode 9. Oh shoot, what happened? Did we lose? We lost the stream. I think you might have to stream it one more time now.
Sure.
Yeah. But so we have those sessions coming up. And then tonight, Adam is going to be talking about Architecture 101. This is a great one to come to. I think we have one more developer coming tonight. So let's start off with introductions while we get this one set up one more time. And so does anyone want to go first? Jay?
Okay. I've been a developer for more than 5 years. I've been working on an app called GoQ. Within a couple of weeks of in beta, I've been working it since Swift 1 to Swift 4. I'm going to start implementing aspects of Swift 4 pretty soon. So that was a fun. Didn't have to, not too much headaches on the migration. Maybe a little with the strings, but it's been a long journey, and I enjoyed it. And enjoyed being a group like this. People who want to learn new techniques.
Thanks for being here, Jay.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to go next?
I'm Jerome. I'm actually a sysadmin, and I wanted to exchange things up a little bit. So always kind of interested in Objective-C. Didn't make time. My wife was a kid, so I'm like, hey, let's try Swift.
Nice.
Start off with kind of more of a fresh start.
Yep.
So right now I'm just pretty much mostly scripting and stuff. Just to
Anybody else want to go next?
I'm Tyler. I'm just learning Swift as a hobby right now. Yeah.
Good.
I'm Neil. I've been working in Japan for the past year and a half, doing like IT work, and I was at a startup doing a little bit of iOS development. I just moved back to Hawaii 3 days ago, actually.
Wow.
And I've kind of been searching online for like, I don't know, freelance worker jobs. So I kind of just want to check out the scene a little bit in Hawaii. And, I'd like to stay in Hawaii if possible, but if there's nothing here for me, I'm thinking back to the West Coast or something. But I don't know. I've been to the Tokyo iOS meetup a few times, and it was nice to meet a few people and to learn a bunch of things. So I thought I'd come and see what this was about.
Cool. Thanks for being here. I guess I'll go next. My name is David Neely. I'm the organizer of this Hawaii iOS Developer Meetup. I'm very happy that you guys found the time to come to this. Appreciate it. And I am a technology and web coordinator at the UNO Career Center on UH campus. And I guess a recent win is I just came back from a water management workshop in North Shore, where the end goal is to connect low-cost tide data sensors across the state at ancient Hawaiian fish ponds, so that each fish pond owner can compare their salinity, oxygen, and tide data with other fish pond owners to determine the best scenario for the growth of the fish and the aquaculture. So about the distance required before setting off a region monitoring. Like region, you entered a region, you exited a region. I'm stuck on it for about a week now. I can't really figure it out. So if someone has experience with that, I'd be open to hearing it. Adam, did you want to do an intro?
Yeah, I'm Adam. I work as an iOS developer. I'm a contractor during the day, and I've started a daily iOS live stream on my Twitch and my YouTube, where I just go over a different topic every day that interests me and I want to keep up on. So it's tough, actually, to speak for an hour a day, but it's really good practice, so happy to be doing it. And for some reason, I can't connect to the iLab. If anybody has a UH account that I could log in with, sweet. Let's get rid of this wireless diagnostics nonsense. Please wait for a diagnostics to complete before quitting. But what if I don't want to? There you go.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's see if we can connect to Screen Hero. Okay, awesome. Do I have to, should I just,
There we go.
yeah.
So it's master here. You need to. Okay. So we're in OBS. Let's see. To update this one to Adam's desktop, and we are good to go.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so,
Turn this off.
yeah. The topic I want to talk about tonight is architecture, and it's a fancy, scary word, but all it really means is how you structure your application. And it's the kind of thing that when you're just trying to learn via books and tutorials, especially about iOS, you don't find best practices a lot of times. You just see code stuck in the app delegate or in the view controller and the view did load because they're not focused on architecture. They want to get to the API or whatever they're trying to teach. And then you just see that over and over and over, and then people tend to use that pattern when they're developing production code. And it's not a big deal if your app is tiny, right? Like nobody really cares. Can I close out of this thing, or is it gonna?
Oh, you can close it.
I can. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So it's not a huge deal if it's a small app, right? But then you're never going to really get paid to make a small app or make something useful.
Sorry, you can keep going. I'm just hearing an echo. I'm just going to mute these.
Yep. So what I did was I built an app yesterday that it's going to look the same when we're done tonight as it does in the beginning, more or less, but it's going to be structured much better. Okay. And what I did was I took the mistakes that I see all the time. These are the mistakes I see on a lot of projects, and I tried to put all the mistakes that I know about into one small application. So, crazy. Okay. All right, so let's pull it up. Okay, so I'll give you a very quick demo of what the app does. It's a table view controller that shows Game of Thrones episodes. So it goes to the iTunes Connect API, which is really easy to access, and it downloads some JSON, and it gets the picture of looks like the season name, episode title, and like author title, just some basic generic information about it. And it's a table view. You can scroll, and you can see that it's kind of choppy as I'm scrolling. So let's take a quick look in the code now, and let's see how this thing is set up. So the app delegate is as bare bones as you could possibly be. There's nothing going on here. Let's look at the storyboard. The storyboard is a very simple storyboard, and actually some of these things we don't even need anymore. So we're going to get we're going to, just to keep it as basic as possible, we have a simple table view controller that is the initial view controller. It has one type of cell, and that cell has a stack view in it, which just really helps you lay out your UI. Inside the stack view is the image, and that was the album art that we saw before. And inside that, there's a couple labels to talk about the collection name, the artist name, and the track name label, right? Now, this is a tracks table view controller. Here's our tracks table view controller. For a data source, it has a variable, and it's an array of tracks, and all it is an array of dictionaries, string any. So that could be anything. It then, when you load the view, it does a networking call. It uses NSURL session to hit this particular endpoint, the iTunes Connect endpoint. It searches for Game of Thrones. It then takes the data and turns it into JSON. It then knows how to pull tracks out of that JSON, and it throws it up in the data source up here.
Presentation mode with fonts.
Absolutely, yep. How's that, guys? Okay, cool. I probably should have not gone with extra large. Presentation. Let's see if that is that still readable?
Yeah, readable.
Okay. Okay. So just continue to walk through here, and then once we update our data source with it's just an array of dictionaries. Then we're going to jump back to the main thread, because this is on a background thread, and we're going to tell our table view, okay, you've got data now. Go ahead and update yourself. There is also the table view data source. So a table view controller has a table view property, and its delegate methods for the data source, basically it just tells you how to feed the information in. So there's going to be one section. The number of rows is going to be equal to the number of tracks that we have. And then cell for row at index path, basically for every single row, what is that cell supposed to look like? Okay, so we pull out a track, we get what that artwork is supposed to be, and then we set a bunch of labels. So all of this works, right? And this is a bunch of different things that, and some of it's arguable, right? Like some of it you can say, you can argue with me about what we're talking about tonight, but it's a debate that should be had. It shouldn't just like everything, like Chase says, massive view controller. We don't want massive view controllers. This is a very simple example. This is only 45 lines big. I've worked on production apps that have view controllers that are like 1,600 lines of code, which is insane. And once you get it that big, it's really hard to pare it back and even understand what it is. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to take some steps towards best practices and start cleaning this thing up. So what we'll start with is I'm just going to go through and identify some of the problems, because I don't know if we're going to get to all of it tonight. But when you're working with UI code like this, you never really want to be feeding it a dictionary. You want a model object that actually describes the data. So we don't want to be working with the dictionary. Use a model. So we'll create a model. Before we go any farther, the one mantra we're going to keep in mind tonight is the single responsibility. Shay, single responsibility? Yeah.
Single responsibility.
Principle.
Yep.
SRP. Single responsibility principle. And everything we do tonight is going to be guided by this idea of the single responsibility principle, which sounds fancy and you want to glaze over it, but it's really important to understand. And it's simple. All it means is that every object you have, so every view controller or everything, should have more or less one well-defined job. Just because it's convenient to dump a bunch of code into the view controller doesn't mean you should do it. So a view controller controls the interaction between the user and their touches, and which is the view side, and your model side. And it's just the glue that puts those two together. So it shouldn't actually be doing things like validating a text field before you submit something. It shouldn't be doing networking code. It shouldn't be doing error handling. There's a lot that it shouldn't be doing. It should just be doing that one thing. So everything we do tonight is going to be kind of going towards a single responsibility principle. So this is the networking code. This doesn't belong in here, so we're going to pull out the networking code. Now, even though Apple says, it starts as the default for the table view delegate to be the view controller, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Exactly.
A table views, the data source for a table view is a single responsibility, and it should be its own class. So
I agree with that one, especially if your data source gets big and complex.
sure, yep.
One of my data sources turned out to be so big I had to make a separate data source for that.
Yeah.
For small, it's okay, but for bigger files or more complex data sources, put it in a separate class.
Great. Now, another thing with this single responsibility is that views should know how to draw themselves, and cells are views. So basically down here, the view controller is telling the cell how to draw itself. It's saying, here's what your label should be, here's what your image should be. The cell itself should be doing all of this drawing. So we're going to say, cell should know how to configure itself. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty good start. That's a lot of changes. And again, with a simple app like this, does it really matter? No, but the old adage, like when you were a kid playing soccer, you play how you practice. So if you're constantly writing code that's with bad architecture, when you actually get a job or a gig, you're gonna make those same bad practices. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a model. And I like to structure my code into different folders, usually like model, UI, supporting, and we're going to call it a track. So usually your model name should describe as closely as possible the real world thing that you're trying to model. So we're going to call it a track. And since there's not a lot of requirements that you wouldn't need to conform to NS object necessarily right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it a struct so we get the value semantics, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
It makes a big difference in large programs.
Yes, yep.
And it depends on how big it is. Oh, there is one catch. Your data source, however, has to be conform. It has to conform to NS object.
Sure, but that's going to be a separate class, right?
Exactly.
So just the model object itself, and certain things I'm going to just pull out of my. So I did my talk today, this afternoon, and I did a run through, and I think it's going to save us a little time if I do a little bit of copy pasting, but I'm not going to just fly through stuff. We are going to talk about it. So we're going to use a struct, again, so it's a value type semantic. And rather than have all those dictionaries where it's just like stringly typed keys like we have back in the view controller back here, like this is junk. You never want to be doing this, because with a small change, it's so easy to mess these things up and get crazy bugs. So now the compiler is going to be able to help us out. So a track has a name and an artist name and a collection name and a cover art image URL. So these are all value types as well. And then if this was a little bit bigger app, we might have more models than this. We might actually have artists and collections. But since this is a really simple one, we can expand as we go later. So we could have added an artist model and reference that here, but at this point we're just going to go with artist name to keep it simple. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to add this concept of a result type. It's going to go in our supporting folder. And this is just a way especially with networking code, sometimes you can get data back and you can get an error back. And that's not a place you want to be. You want to be able to define it as one or the other. So a great way to do that is through an enum. So we're going to either return a success or a failure through all of our networking code. And this generic here just means that this could be of any type. So it could be type track, it could be of type JSON, it could be of type whatever we define it to be. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get all of this networking code out of the view controller. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a fetcher. So we're actually going to write this code out because this is pretty important. Okay, this is an important concept. So this is going to be a tracks fetcher. And sometimes you sit there and you think about these names for a long time. Like, what is this thing going to do? It's going to fetch tracks for you, okay? And some of this tracks fetcher. Now, notice that it doesn't mention anything to do about where we're going to be fetching the tracks from. It doesn't know, as the view controller, as the caller, you don't know if you're going to be getting it from an XML data source, a JSON data source, a local data source. You have no idea, and you don't care because it's not your responsibility to know. You're not encoded with that knowledge just to know where these tracks are going to come from. It's the tracks fetcher's job to know where it's going to come from, okay? So we're going to have a method, and it's going to be func fetch all, and we're going to have a completion handler. And I will explain this. Okay, so we're going to fetch all, and we're going to take, the only parameter we're going to take is a completion handler. It's going to be a tracks completion handler. Now what this means is that we're going to be returning in this completion handler a result type with an array of tracks in it. So you're guaranteed to either get an array of tracks, which you can use in your interface, or an error. You're not going to get both. So this thing is going to say, this thing is going to have the knowledge of where we want to get it from. And in our case, we want to get JSON tracks. We want to go up to the server and get tracks based on JSON. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to make a new folder. We'll call it networking. And this is going to be a tracks JSON service. So enum tracks JSON service. So a tracks JSON service is a networking service that is going to get tracks in a JSON format. So this is, if you're going to have, say we had two types of places we could go to get tracks, XML and JSON, you wouldn't just make a tracks manager or something. This is very, very specific. This thing knows how to get tracks based on JSON and return JSON for you. And the reason it's an enum is kind of a subtle thing. it's a value type, which is nice, but we're always going to call this statically in this particular case. And you can't instantiate an enum, right? So this forces you, as the person who writes this, and somebody else later, that you can never ever instantiate it. You can only call it statically. So it's like it's a way that you can prevent errors in the future. So again, this thing is going to be static fetch, static func fetch all. And it's also going to have a result type. Oh yeah, I'll grab that in a second. Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's the German spelling.
It
Happens constantly. And so this one's also going to have a completion handler because it's asynchronous code.
So this is going to be your best practice, going forward, setting up a completion handler when you do networking code.
Yeah, yeah, because you don't want to block the main thread, so you need to be calling it asynchronously.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is going to be of type tracks JSON completion handler. So in this so because this is generic, this result type, this one is going to be returning an array of any, which is how JSON is going to come back. So now back to our tracks fetcher, our generic tracks fetcher, which the caller, in this case the view controller, again, it only wants to get tracks or an error back. It doesn't care. This thing knows, okay, well, I know that I need to go out and get JSON tracks. So we're going to call the tracks JSON service fetch all. What? Static func fetch all. Why is it giving me a hard time? Ah, okay. Okay, so we will come back to here, but now we're going to start making some real progress. Now we're going to be able to pull our networking code out of view.did_load, and we're going to put it into where it belongs, which is the tracks JSON service. We're going to have to doctor this thing up a little bit. So let's look at what we got here. We aren't going to have to do this UI stuff. We aren't going to have to update the data model because we're just going to be passing something back. So let's start by creating a URL. And we're going to guard. So before we were force casting it, and that would make it crash if for some reason it returned null. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to go with the architectural practice called return early. So you want to find everywhere in your code that things can screw up, and you want to check those early in your function.
Early exit.
Exit early, right. So, and then if anything screws up, then you can bail early.
Much better than if early exit isn't that big else.
Right, but so now we can't just return here because the caller is going to be waiting on a completion handler. So we're going to need to pass an error. So the easiest way we can do that is we'll create another enum called track error. And it's going to conform to the error protocol. We're going to start off with one case. We'll just call it bad URL. You would never do this in a production app. You would have more, you'd give more information about what was going on, what was wrong. But for now, this is cool. So we can then call our completion handler. And our result is going to be of type failure. And we have an error to pass in, and that'll be our track error.bad URL. Okay, cool. Making progress. So if for some reason this is not able to create a URL for us, we're going to bail right there. data task equals URL session. So what is this thing complaining about? Ah, okay. Now we're going to pass in that URL. So we're creating a data task, and this is basically how we go ahead and talk to the server. And once it's talked to the server, we're going to get back a closure with some data, a response, and an error. And these are optional. So the first thing we're going to try to do is we're going to try to serialize our data and get some JSON out of it, and not force cast everything. So I'm pretty sure data is optional. Yeah, so first we're going to check for data. And then we're also going to make sure there's no error. So guard let error equal nil. And then let data equals data else. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going to guard and we're going to return early again if any of these problems arise up. So we're going to make sure error is nil. And if there's an error, we're going to return early. And we're going to make sure there's data, otherwise we're going to return early. For now, we'll just do completion handler. We'll add one more. We'll add another track error. We'll just say networking problem. So our completion handler is now going to return result dot failure, and that's going to be track error dot networking problem. Now sign error, oh, error equals. Sorry about that.
On line 15.
Line.
Guard error.
Yeah, so we're just making sure here that error equals nil. So you don't have to let when you do guard. You can use guard for any type of comparison thing.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. So we're gonna say guard, make sure error is nil, and make sure that data is not nil.
Right.
Otherwise, we're gonna bail.
Okay.
So now we don't have to force cast our data. And then we're going to say down here, we're going to say guard, we're going to try this. I'm going to say guard let JSON equal, we're going to try to serialize this as type string any. Else, yeah, we'll just go with the same error. So there's a lot more code here, but we're doing things right. Like we're checking at each phase what's going on. And now we know that JSON exists. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I guess we can do the same thing here. We can guard and make sure the tracks is of type string any. Oh, okay, sorry. You know what we can actually do is we can include this with our last guard statement. Value of optional type not unwrapped. I don't know. But JSON equal JSON? Nope. Okay, let's pull out the cheat sheet and see what I did wrong here.
You're not defining JSON until that guard statement finishes.
Remember, when you do the
So
guard
you
let,
have to-
it's local.
So you're defining the JSON there, but you're using it before the guard statement finishes.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay, yep.
Remember, when you do guard,
Thank you.
that value is local to that.
Yep.
So
Thank you.
that's easy. That's a fact that's easy to test.
JSON. That's all right. We're gonna go to the cheat sheet because we don't want to spend too much time on this stuff. So what data equals data? You know what we're really going to do is we're going to full on sheet and then explain it.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. Son of a bitch. Sorry guys, this is the problem with live demos or live tutorials.
Did you sacrifice the right number of chickens to the demo gods?
No! Does anyone have a chicken?
It's awesome outside.
Yeah.
Playing by the courthouse.
Yeah.
I live in Kaneohe, so that shouldn't have been a problem.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a problem. You find chickens everywhere that side.
Okay, so let's go back real quickly. So again, we're guarding to get our URL up here. Then data task is going to use that URL, and we're going to make sure there's no error, otherwise we're going to return.
Right.
We're going to make sure that data exists, otherwise we're going to return. Then we're going to call this helper function called transform data with completion handler down here. Then we're going to make sure we have JSON, and then we're going to make sure that we have tracks. And tracks, so JSON comes back as a dictionary with a bunch of keys, and one of those keys is results. And that's what has the tracks information in it. So again, if there's no tracks, we're going to return. And finally, if we can pass all of those hurdles, our completion handler is going to return success, and it's going to return tracks. And remember, this tracks is just an array of JSON dictionaries, okay? That is this caller up here. So now back in our tracks fetcher, we're saying tracks JSON service fetch all result, and let's just see if it's all working at this point. Oh, it won't because we never called tracks fetcher. Hold on a second here. So back to our view controller. Let tracks fetcher equal tracks fetcher. And then we'll say tracks fetcher dot fetch all. And we'll get a completion handler, but we know nothing's going to be coming back here yet because we haven't gotten at this point. But now we can run it and see where we're at. Okay, sweet. So it looks like we got our results, and we're going to print it out. And we got a bunch of JSON. So we're on the road here. Now, we have JSON. We have to figure out how we're going to transform that into tracks so we can give it back to the call site, which in this case is the view controller. Now, one approach would be we could, transform that JSON here and create tracks, but we're not going to do that. We're going to use best practices. So we're going to create a single object that its entire job in life is to transform JSON into tracks. Okay? Exactly, that's right.
Is that a design pattern decoder?
In a way, yeah.
Um,
I know what like you use this before you can actually decode JSON.
So we're going to call ours, it tracks JSON transformer, and that's just going to, it's going to be a struct, again, so it's a value type. And so this thing's entire job in life is to transform JSON into tracks. And this is the kind of thing that you want to be doing unit testing on. It's easy to make mistakes, that things are stringly typed. So if you're looking for places in your code to do unit tests, something like this, which is very kind of compact and it's really easy to make mistakes on, this is a great place for unit tests. So we're going to do a copy paste here just because of time, but I am going to walk through the code. Okay, so there's a public method which is static, and it's simply tracks from JSON, and it returns an array of track.
Right.
But the real work gets done down here in the private method, which transforms one JSON dictionary of type string any into an optional track. So we're gonna be using our friend guard again, and if any of this stuff screws up, if any of it is not right, we're gonna bail and we're gonna return nil. So we're gonna make sure that the JSON is not nil, and then we're gonna make sure that all of these properties, track name, artist name, collection name, and artwork URL, all exist and not nil. And if they are, that's fine. We're going to return nil, and then we're going to go process the next one. And then we're going to create our track and return it if everything is successful.
Can I ask you a question now?
Yeah, sure.
So I've noticed in the past that when you you have your guard let, you usually do a fatal error. I've noticed in times that I've seen you code, but now you're doing a nil here. Is it because you've got to the point where you don't want to be using fatal error now? Now you're returning an optional?
Yeah, so in this particular case, so in some places, like, especially if you don't return anything, right, and it's going to screw up this. Okay, that's a great point. So the times when I do fatal error is if something weird happens and all of a sudden the state of your code is going to be something wacky, like you can't predict what's going to happen anymore. It's probably better if you crash.
Yeah.
Like if you're looking for a view controller and then the view controller doesn't exist and it returns nil, like what's the state of your app?
Or
Crash.
yeah. Or
Here,
a network error, you don't want to crash.
exactly. So here, maybe the iTunes API for three of the things didn't have an artist name. Not the end of the world. I can return optional, and we'll have like 17 instead of 20 things in our list, and it'll still be functional.
Okay.
That's my distinction for those kind of
Okay,
things.
thanks.
Yeah. Or if I'm feeling lazy, I'll just do fatal error because then you don't have to think about it. But that's the real distinction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Basically, for networking errors, because they're expected, because it can happen, you don't want to crash the app because of expected errors.
Yep.
Unexpected errors, like what Adam was speaking about, like your view controller messed up or arrays out of bounds where you get undefined behavior, then you want to crash.
So is it safe to say that when you are not in control of the network resource, then
Right.
you should be allowing for it to?
Yeah, fail gracefully.
Okay.
Now, but if it's a programmer error, like
Right.
then
Then you fail
then-
error.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Besides,
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So back in your tracks JSON transformer,
Yes.
when you're decoding from JSON, you have it all in one guard statement. So, for example, let's say you ask the API for, I don't know, collection name, but perhaps there's no collection name or collection name is nil.
Yep.
You're choosing here to return the whole track as nil?
Yeah, only because of my simplistic data model. And for me, nothing here is optional. I'm just saying, in real life, yeah, you'd most likely several of these would be optional. But in general, you want to have few optional properties as possible so your code's easier to work with. Yeah, but in my simplistic case here, I'm just assuming they all have to be there, so that's why I'm bailing if any of it's no. Yeah.
Yes, you can do fine-grained control. Because certain objects may be optional, then you gotta handle that case, particular case. Doing that has a fine-grained control. Some data, some are optional, and some are not. So yeah.
Okay, so let me catch you guys up to where I'm at. I just got a couple things moving. Okay, so now we're back in our generic tracks fetcher, which can fetch a track from any type of source. And it's called our tracks JSON service, and it's gotten our result back, and it can have one of two cases, either failure with an error, in which case we're just going to pass in this completion handler's failure, and we're just going to propagate that error along. Or if it's successful, we now have a bunch of JSON. We need our responsibility is to return a bunch of tracks. So before we can do that, we need to be able to transform that, and we can now say let tracks equal track JSON transformer dot. So give me the tracks from JSON, and we have JSON right here. Then we can say completion handler. Results. Yeah. Success. And then we're just going to pass the tracks in. Now these tracks come from our JSON transformer. So we pass in JSON, we get back tracks, and it's our job in this completion handler to pass back tracks. So perfect. There we go. Now we are back in our view controller. The only thing it has to know networking wise is that it has a tracks fetcher, and fetch me some tracks. And again, we're going to do our switch on results. And then, like every demo ever, we're just going to print the error. Even I'm not going to try to do error handling, even though you should. And so now we've got an array of tracks. So what we need to do here is we need to update our data model, which used to be this ugly array of dictionaries. Now we're just going to make it an array of tracks. We can get rid of this to do. And we're going to say tracks dot append contents of tracks. So we're going to basically stick all of the tracks we got back from the network into our data model up here. Wait, what? Oh, self dot. Okay, sorry. Self dot, because these are both called tracks. Okay, great. Now we've got a couple issues here. Basically, we are going to fix all of these in a minute, but we're going to take a quick break. I know I've been moving really, really fast, but this is the only way to do it tonight, unfortunately. Who's got some questions they want to ask before we go any further?
I have a question. What was your hotkey set for commenting out all that code in that?
Oh, commands front slash.
I didn't know.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, we are going to keep moving. So I think the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have our cell, which right now just has a bunch of outlets. We're going to have the cell, again, with our single responsibility principle, know how to draw itself. It's not the view controller's job to tell the cell how to arrange itself. It's the cell's job. So the pattern I usually use here is I have a configure method with and the name of the model. So tracks. Oh no, track, single track. So now we can just basically say, forgetting the image for a second, text equals track dot collection name and artist name label dot text equals track. Track, oh, just that name. Okay. So back in our view controller, we can kill all of this code and we'll call this track. So basically, self-heroic index path, we're going to get the track from our data source at this index path.row, and then we're just going to say cell.configure with track. And there we go. The view controller no longer knows how to, and it shouldn't know how to deal with that cell's layout.
Especially if you have a lot of stuff on your cell, that can get really annoying to look at.
Absolutely. Yep. Let's see, one more thing that we can do here. I'm not going to get to the images right now. Okay, so just to point out with the images, the way I was doing images before was purposely bad. And you can leave this as an exercise for you guys to fix. But I was getting the track URL. Then I was synchronously getting the data from the network and then updating that image view with the image based on that data. So every single one of those was pulling synchronously and blocking the main thread. And this is probably like something you could follow up with on your talk about how to do things. That's why we were getting that really staticky scrolling on the table view before, is because it was going out to the network, getting the image, blocking the main thread, and then coming back and doing this.
When you're getting images, you want to do this on a separate thread.
A background thread.
Yeah,
The way I really like to do it is Alamo Fire image. This thing is awesome.
Yes.
You've been checking that out?
I use Alamo Fire, but I don't know about the image part.
Yeah, it's great. So basically,
I was looking at some of the stuff there, but you can always do it manually.
sure. I mean, you can do it. You can absolutely do it manually. I never do, just because this is so easy that all you have to do is like image cache. Of course I'm having trouble with this now. Well, I would say look it up. Of course they make it hard when I'm trying to find it in front of all you guys, but this is totally the way to asynchronously load and cache images from the network. It's really awesome. So let's go back. Let's kill all of this stuff for now. Wait. And there's one more thing we're going to get to, and then we're going to call it a day. Okay, let's just double check that it all still works, minus the images for now. Oh, I think I know what it is. It's the same thing I screwed up on today. So we are updating the data model here, right? We're saying, adding everything we got back to the tracks array, but then we have to tell self.tableview .reload data.
Yeah, you have to reload it. That's easy.
And there we go. So it looks, I mean, it looks a little crappier, but basically it looks the same if we had the images, but this is the type of thing you can then really, you can take these patterns and you can make a huge app, right? And you're not going to have thousands and thousands of lines in your view controller. So what I would recommend if you guys want to try this later is you take this code here and using the single responsibility principle, create an object, and like Chase said, this has to conform to NS object, because let's take a look at it real quick. UI table view data source.
And the beauty of you having to do that, because you can use that same data source for your other apps. Like mine, I can use that same data source for collection view, table view, or whatever.
Yep.
Reusability.
So it inherits from NS object. And so you need to basically make an NS object that conforms to UI table view data source, fill in all the required methods, and then up here in view did load, you set your table view dot data source, and you override the one that's currently, which is the view controller, and you set your new object as the data source. And that way, again, all of this code, which shouldn't be here, is cleaned up and put in its own separate file. Yeah. So.
I just did it for one major piece. I just got it did already. Just got lazy later.
Any questions? Anything you guys want to talk about?
I have a
Yep.
question.
Sure.
Maybe it's a little bit off topic, but when we were looking at your storyboard, you were using prototype cells for your table.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found any way to kind of like make sweeping changes to your table cells? For example, let's say I had 5 different view controllers using the same table cell.
Yep.
I wanted to change all the table cells to be the same. Have you found a way to do that via the storyboard?
No, the way that I've seen people do it, and I have the same problem all the time in my apps, is you create a zip file, a separate zip file that you set to basically a base class. So you give it like, in this case it would be like a track base class, and then you can subclass it in other files. So if you need to have different subclasses with different functionality, but you could all pull from the same zip file. But if you're just trying to pull from a storyboard, there's no possibility to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why, doing a bigger project, I kind of shy away from the storyboard. I mean, it's great and it's so visual and it's so fun to use, but yeah.
So you can mix and match, right? You can, by default, table view controller uses the cell from the storyboard. You can override that and you can register a zip file in your view did load and use that separate zip and still make use of the power of storyboards.
Yeah. So you can actually add, but in order for use to zip, you gotta register that class. If you don't, well, you get crashes.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're just using the storyboard, you don't have to register. But if you're using external, like a zip or manually or programmatically, you have to register it.
Yep. So the code, if you guys want to try this exercise on your own, it's on my GitHub page, Adam on the Run, and it's /bad architecture. And the master branch has the original code that all works but is ugly. And you can see a couple of my attempts to fix things up in like some of the feature branches. So.
Did you want to do a quick plug of your live coding?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So every day at 2 p.m. our time, I do a live stream. And I'm on both YouTube, which I don't have enough followers to have like a real cool URL, but it's that. Or if you're on Twitch, I'm twitch.tv/Adam on the Run. And I go through like a series of topics basically. I just did drag and drop for like the past week.
How is it?
What's that?
How's drag and drop?
Drag and drop's great. It's really powerful. It's only used for iPad right now. But it really allows you to drag and drop things very simply in your own app and between apps. So if you kind of register for like the type of data you're interested in dragging, like letting people drag out or drop in, and then you can like intercommunicate between apps. It's pretty cool. I'm gonna probably do ARKit next, although I'm a little scared. I might bail on that if it gets too hard. But sometimes I'm pretty prepared and polished, and sometimes it's like me stumbling through things and hopefully talking to people about it. So, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Nice talking to you guys.
I just want to kind of close it out. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 7 o'clock right now, so if you need to go, absolutely you can go. But I just want to do one more roundtable, just because we had some developers come in a bit later, and it's just a chance to introduce yourselves as well. So just like 10-second intros. I'll go first, and let's go in a clockwise. So Leo, you're going to be next. So I'm David Neely. I'm the organizer of this. Please, if you enjoy this, like leave comments on the Meetup page, and thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
I'm Leo. I was working in Japan, and I just came back to Hawaii a few days ago, and kind of wanted to check out the iOS scene here, and see if there's any option to work in Hawaii possibly. So, anyway, sorry.
Actually, I'm a developer for iOS for about 5 to 6 years. We're working on a major project that's like thousands of codes, and I understand what Adam was talking about, the architecture, especially with very large apps.
My name's Felix. I work as a business analyst, but I'm learning Swift on the side.
Jordan just graduated computer science, but they didn't really teach Swift, so I'm trying to learn Swift on the side.
Cool.
I'm Bro. I'm a sysadmin. Like to learn Swift.
And I'm Tyler. I'm just learning Swift as a hobby right now.
Adam, do iOS development as a contractor, and then I do my daily live stream.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. See you in the meetup.
So what are the requirements to use drag and drop?
You just have to conform